So today we're going to unpack a huge contradiction that's really shaking up the airline industry. Get this, American Airlines just posted record-breaking sales, and then, in almost the same breath, they announced they're laying off thousands of people. It doesn't add up, right? So let's figure out what is really going on here.
And that right there, that's the big mystery we are tackling. How on earth does a company that's seemingly flying high on sales suddenly decide to drop thousands of staff from its payroll? Well, to understand it, we've got to follow the money, because the numbers, they tell a really fascinating and honestly a conflicting story.
All right, first up, the good news for American. In the third quarter of 2025, the airline pulled in a jaw-dropping $13.7 billion in revenue. That's a company record, and it tells us one thing loud and clear: people are buying tickets. Demand is absolutely not the problem here.
But here's the kicker. Despite all that cash flowing in, when they added everything up, all the expenses, American Airlines actually ended the quarter with a net loss of $114 million. And that's the whole paradox right there. Record income, yet still in the red. The money was pouring in, but it was pouring out even faster.
So let's dive into our first section here, a record and a loss. We need to really explore this bizarre financial situation that was happening while the airline was, cruising at 30,000 feet.
Believe it or not, this kind of situation actually has a name. It's called the revenue loss paradox. It's what happens when a company looks incredibly successful from the outside with tons of sales and people wanting their product, but its internal costs are just so high that it can't actually turn a profit. The problem isn't getting customers in the door. It's the fundamental cost of just keeping the lights on.
So what specifically caused this loss? Well, management pointed to a few things: some really bad weather, that big FAA tech outage, and of course the usual suspects, high labor and fuel costs. But the real root of the problem, the one we really need to focus on, was something way deeper: these structural cost inefficiencies.
And that brings us perfectly to our next section, cracking the cost code. We're going to dig into why Americans' costs had gotten so bloated, especially compared to their competition.
What's really revealing is a surprisingly blunt admission from management. As travel came roaring back after the pandemic, the company just went on a massive hiring spree. And now they're basically admitting, yeah, we overhired. They're framing these huge layoffs as just trimming some COVID-era excess.
And hey, the numbers don't lie. You can see the result of that overhiring right here. In 2024, American Airlines had way more employees than its main rivals, Delta and United, both of whom, by the way, were profitable during the same time. That created a really clear efficiency gap.
So what does that actually mean, a structural efficiency gap? Well, it basically meant the airline had a much smaller financial cushion. It was like they had no safety net. So when unexpected problems hit, like bad weather or a tech outage, they just couldn't absorb the costs. And all that record-breaking revenue just couldn't be turned into profit.
This whole situation was just unsustainable, and it forced the company to do something drastic. Which brings us to our next chapter, the Great Recalibration. This is the story of how they started to fundamentally reshape their entire workforce. Now, in their official statements, the company's language was, it was very careful. A lot of corporate speak. They described the move as just a small reduction, meant to right-size for the work we do today. It sounds so minor, almost like a routine little tweet.
But the reality? It was anything but small. Internal reports and industry insiders painted a very different picture. The estimates suggested the cuts could hit as many as 6,500 jobs. That's between 4 and 5% of their entire workforce. That is not a small adjustment. That is a massive overhaul.
So how'd they do it? Well, it was a two-pronged strategy. First, domestic layoffs. These mostly targeted non-union corporate staff, hitting middle management and back office roles pretty hard, especially at their headquarters. And second, they started a major global offshoring plan, moving a ton of IT, technical, and admin jobs to a brand new hub in Hyderabad, India.
And, behind all these big corporate strategies and numbers are, of course, real people. This quote from the spouse of a 37-year veteran employee who was let go is it's heartbreaking. It reminds us of the huge human cost. For thousands of families, the impact was immediate, and it was immense.
But this story isn't just about cutting costs. Not at all. It's about taking that capital and redirecting it toward a completely new vision for the airline. Which brings us to our next part, funding the premium pivot.
So where are the savings from those layoffs actually going? Well, they're being plowed directly into creating a more high-end, premium experience. This is Americans' big gamble. They're trying to escape that middle ground where so many legacy airlines get squeezed. So they're investing in things like brand new flagship suites, we're talking private pods with lie flat beds, and modernizing their whole fleet. American is betting its entire future on attracting customers who are willing to pay more.
And this chart right here, this shows you exactly why they're making that bet. Even in that same really tough quarter, revenue growth from the premium cabins stayed strong, while the main cabin started to soften a little. The data was crystal clear. The real growth is at the front of the plane.
It's also really telling to see how American's aggressive move stacks up against what its rivals were doing. Yet Southwest also announced layoffs, but that was part of a bigger restructuring. United, on the other hand, got a similar reduction in management staff just through natural attrition, not replacing people who retired or just left. American's choice to go with rapid, mass layoffs instead of a slower, more gradual approach, it signals a deep sense of urgency. You can tell that management felt like they were falling way behind their competitors, and they needed to make a drastic change, and they needed to make it fast. All of this leads us to our final section, a high-stakes gamble, because that's exactly what this is. This entire painful strategy is balanced on a knife's edge between potentially huge risks and, massive rewards.
And the risks, they are very, very real. First, you've got the knowledge drain from losing all those long-serving employees. Then you risk a total collapse in morale among the staff who are left, which is the exact opposite of what you need to build a premium service culture. Add to that the operational risk of messing up the whole offshoring plan and the market risk that maybe not enough of those premium customers will actually show up.
So how did the market react to all this? Well, investors were skeptical at first. The stock took a pretty decent hit. But most financial analysts seem to agree that while it's painful, the move was probably necessary for the airline's long-term health. The company is stable. This isn't about survival. It's a strategic gamble for future profit. Which leaves us with the final, critical question that just hangs over this entire story. Will this painful, high-stakes gamble actually work? Will it succeed in transforming American into a truly premium airline that can finally compete? Or will it end up just hollowing out the company, losing the very expertise and morale it needed to fly high in the first place?